Hi, everyone. Welcome to True Disabled Story. My name is Nico, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white man with floppy blonde hair, large blue and brown spectacles, and a black, white, and purple checkered button up shirt. I'm seated against a purple wall and some bookcases. This is my home office. Like roughly 25% of Americans and 17% of Philadelphians, I'm disabled. Whether we look locally, nationally, or globally, disability communities are full of dynamic, diverse, and delightful people with their own stories to tell. All we have to do is listen. Today, I'm joined by MJ. MJ is the second person to sit with me for this project. So we're still kind of working the kinks out as we go, building the airplane even as we fly it. But we'll still stick with the same four questions. MJ, thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me as part of your project. I appreciate it. I think it's great to be able to share our stories as, you know, navigating the world with a disability.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, MJ, I know that we haven't had much introduction to each other before this, but what was your path to diagnosis like? Was this something that really surprised you, or were you actively pursuing it? Uh, paint that scene for us.
So I was born with cerebral palsy, and it's something that it's actually diagnosed
Yeah.
at the moment that you're born. But even though I had a diagnosis, it was never a thing where I was treated as disabled because I have mild cerebral palsy. So it's more of a thing where if I don't tell you, you wouldn't know. Um, but the reason why I wanted to share kind of like this path through diagnosis, it's because even though I had a diagnosis, it was as if I didn't. Just because it was never a thing where growing up, it wasn't as much a big part of my life. And when I was 23 years old, something changed, and my cerebral palsy became and my disability became such a core part of my life that it made so much sense, and I understood so many things. So as I mentioned, like growing up, it wasn't that important, but I did feel different in the sense that everybody would run faster than me. There were things in physical education that I couldn't do, and some professors will get mad at it, or other teachers were, well, like it's fine, you don't have to do it. I remember there was one time that one of the teachers pulled me aside and teach me this exercise to walk better, but it was a thing. I remember I was in second grade, and even though she did that, it was not a thing where she talked to my parents about it, because we all know that physical education teachers do have to go through certain education, that they will clearly know when somebody has certain limitations. And that's why she pulled me aside, right? But it was never something that I think that she should have talked to my parents about it. I also will get a lot of pain in my left leg. So I have hemiplegia, which means paralysis on only one side of the body. And I will have pain in my left leg. And then I don't know if it was my mom or the doctor who will tell her that it was growing pains, or if it was just her, so I will just stop talking or complaining. Um, So all the time she'll be like, "Oh, it's growing pains, it's growing pains." But why would I get growing pain in one leg and not the other one, right? And then there was after puberty, I started having a lot of pain in my feet, and I went to a doctor, and he told me I needed an insole. The insole worked. My foot pain stopped, and it was great. And then I was born in Colombia, and then I decided to come to Canada, and I did environmental management at school, and that sometimes require you to do field work and be outside. And again, I started having chronic pain in my leg, and I went to a doctor, and he said that like what I had was not a big deal, that I should just like exercise a little bit more. I started using one of my I also went to physio, and the physiotherapist told me that I could use the kinetic tape, which really helps me, and I love the kinetic tape. Uh, but anyway, this doctor told me, hey, it's not a big deal. Just do some exercise, and then maybe when once you're like more mature, like in a mature age, you might want to have some surgery or something like that if it bothers you too much. Okay. And then I kept going with my life. The kinetic tape helped. It seems that it was all fine again. And then in November 2020, I was 23 years old. I was going down the stairs, and I got foot drop, which is something very common with cerebral palsy. And I didn't want to hurt my foot, so I started just like juggling, and I ended up breaking my arm. And it was a severe injury. It's called a cerebral triad, which means that you dislocate, there's dislocation, there's ligament detachment, and there's a fracture of the radial head. And I needed surgery. They had to replace my radial head because it was completely shattered. And the thing at that time is that I told them that I had cerebral palsy, and when you suffer an injury, the most important part of the whole recovery is physical therapy. And when I started physical therapy, I asked the therapist if my cerebral palsy was going to be a problem. And he said that if I was able to do, like, because I was able to do everything with my arm, it sometimes it will be a little bit more, like, it will be weaker than my right arm, but like for the most part, I could do everything. And so he said that if I was able to do everything, I should be able to recover completely. But I had therapy like twice a week, and that was not enough. Like in terms of like how severe the injury was, and how, because my arm wasn't moving and wasn't having as much activity, it would get very, very stiff. Because that's the other thing with elbows. They are very tricky because they get very stiff really fast and very easily as well. So it was like a combination. It was like the perfect combination not to work well. And then I decided to, I wasn't getting any progress. Like my arm wasn't functional at all. It was 90 degrees all the time. I remember I even had to pay a very, very expensive medical device that will basically help you with the extension and flexion, but it did nothing to me because at that point it was already like very, very stiff. So I decided to go back to Colombia and get a second opinion there. And I was lucky enough to get such an amazing doctor. He said that he was going to do a revision surgery, that the problem was because it wasn't like functional at all, like calcifications started to form, so that's why it was stiff, and that can only be removed through surgery. And then another part of the story is that when I had the first surgery, I had complications with the anesthesia. So it was like a very traumatic event overall. And when I told him that I had issues with the anesthesia, he didn't want to put me under general anesthesia. He put just local, and I was awake during the whole surgery, which was very beneficial because when he was done with the surgery, he was testing the range of motion, and he said, "Okay, this arm actually does stand about 90%, but then it crawls back. Why is it doing that?" And I told him it's because of the cerebral palsy. and he basically just like stared at me for like 10 seconds, and then he was like, "Oh, that's right." And then he made a plan so that I could recover as much mobility as possible, taking into account cerebral palsy. So, like, because at first he asked me, "Did you bring a sling?" And I said, "Yes." But then after he saw that, he decided to immobilize my, like, to make a brace for the extension so that it will be immobilized, but it won't be at 90 degrees. So that way, like, the muscles won't want to stay like that. And then I had to do therapy every day for about 6 to 7 months, but that was necessary. And then the thing was that it was also very tricky because what you will do for like injury rehab would be will not necessarily what you will do for cerebral palsy or for treating spasticity. And there was one time that I had like the worst chronic pain, and it was very frustrating because I will go to therapy saying like, "Hey, I have chronic pain," and then the only thing they will say will be like, "Oh, that's your like condition, and like we cannot do anything about it." But I'm like, "Yeah, I have pain because I'm doing exercises to recover from my injury. So like you guys need to figure out like a middle point." Um, and I realized that that was not the best place to do physiotherapy, so I found another therapist, and she was more willing to find that middle point so that I could recover mobility, but still being mindful of my cerebral palsy. And then because because that happened to me, even though it was like very hard and it changed my life, I started doing all these like disability advocacy and like talking to people about how important it is to talk about how you're feeling, because that's the thing. You may think, oh, it's mild, or oh, it's hidden, or it's not a big deal, but if it bothers you, it's because it's somehow significant.
Thank you, MJ. That was really comprehensive, and you touch on a lot of really interesting topics. I love how you talk about how cerebral palsy wasn't a big deal for you at first, but then it was. How you relied upon doctors, some of whom supported you better than others did, and some who could have done a better job. I would like to, with this question, now give you a bit more room to expand on that. So, what impact overall has your diagnosis had on your life? So, we've talked about the physical therapy, we've talked about the surgical interventions. What is life like for you now, or what does a daily day or a week look like for you?
I feel that again because this happened to me. I'm very grateful that it happened to me, even though it was very hard, because it allowed me to get to know this beautiful world that I wouldn't have known otherwise. I think that I've come to understand that there's no shame in disability, because before, you know how they raise you, like, it's you shouldn't be saying that you have a disability because then like you wouldn't get the job or something like that. And like it's nothing like that. I think that it all depends with the intention that you do things, and this applies to everything, not only disability. But if you are gonna go somewhere saying, like, basically feeling sorry for yourself, like I can't do this because I have a disability, it all depends with the intention. It's very important to know your limitations and say, no, I cannot do this, or I'd rather not do this. But at the same time, I think what I'm trying to say is it can be a superpower if if you want it to be that way. So as I mentioned, like I advocate for other people that have disabilities, especially hidden disabilities. I um I have like gotten to know myself way better. There's some days that are hard because I feel that I can't trust my own body, and that's very, very, very frustrating and scary at the same time. But again, I have learned not to be ashamed of saying, "Hey, I need help," and because I have a disability. And something that I experienced recently that I loved was, I don't know if you know about this initiative, you do, you probably do, um, in airports that they have the sunflower lanyard. And it was my very first time using it in a flight, and it was amazing because I could ask for help without explaining why I needed the help. You know what I mean? Because it can also be draining, especially for people with hidden disabilities, to have to explain like, hey, I need this because I mean, it's a complete stranger. You also don't want to be like that vulnerable with that other person. So it was a great thing, and I think the fact that we are also opening the floor to not all disabilities are visible, and all of this has been amazing. Again, there's like days that it can be frustrating because I feel like I wish I could do things, but at the same time, I know that um, I'm doing the best with what I have, and just to take it easy and have grace on myself as well, it's important.
MJ, thank you. You touch on something that I always like to remind myself and remind others is that everybody everywhere is doing the best they can with what they have. I really love what you talk about in terms of invisible disabilities and in terms of, um, you know, being free of that burden to feel like you have to explain your disability all the time, right? I remember an instance in my own life when I was actually among friends, people who openly know that I'm disabled, and even then, like it was at the end of a long day, and someone asked like about the exact specifications of my congenital disorder. Well, like you, I was diagnosed at birth, and even among friends, I was just like, I am so exhausted. I do not want to have this conversation. I just shut down. So I do see you in that 100%. MJ, thank you so much for moving right along here. Uh, Looking back, what advice would you give people with your diagnosis if you had a chance to speak directly to a young kid with cerebral palsy? What advice would you have for them?
My advice would be to advocate for yourself. Like I find that obviously when you're a kid it's very hard because you depend on your parents and whether like they understand what you're going through, and even like I find that when you're born with a disability, it's very interesting because you like I grew up in a world where I used to believe that everybody had a bad leg and a good leg. You know what I mean? So it is your reality. So it's kind of hard to like explain to your parent something when like for you it's normal, but for them it's not. But they might not have that knowledge to that extent to know that that's not normal. So like it's and I admire my mom a lot because I always put this example like parenting. It's hard on itself. There's no manual for parenting, but it's also like imagine yourself trying to teach your kid that only has one hand to eat or to button their shirt when you don't even know how to do it yourself. So I think that it's very tricky with kids because of that. But again, I think that you really need to find a way to advocate for yourself. Um, And I'm sure that if you are strong enough, your parents would listen, which reminds me of a story. When I was about 16 or 17 years old, my knee started to hurt. And it was so painful. And I was like, Mom, my knee hurts. My knee hurts. And I don't know, maybe she was busy at work. My mom is a great mom. I don't want to judge her, but like she wouldn't pay attention to me at the time. So, and I couldn't stand the pain, so I went and got some crutches,
Crutches,
because
yeah.
I couldn't stand the pain. So, and then she was like, "Oh, she might be in a lot of pain then." Um, so I think that again, if it's something that bothers you, even though you think it's like a small thing or not that important, if it bothers you, it's because it's somehow significant. So if you if you're I hope that your parents support you, but if they don't, find somebody that will, because there will be people that will want to help you. I mean, like we're building this community exactly for the same reason, right? So,
Yeah. MJ, you really touch on uh something that I feel very strongly about, right? And it is that even though I grew up really under the best circumstances possible at the time, um, I want to make sure that those same resources, that same support are here for future generations and for all disabled people. So it is exactly as you say, we build that community that we want to be part of. And I really respect you for saying that. That's fantastic. MJ, it sounds like you have had a whole lifetime of experiences with cerebral palsy. It sounds like you've had to be hard on yourself in some situations and easy on yourself in others. And I know how challenging it can be that flexible. I want to thank you for your time so much, MJ. I definitely want to stay in touch as we close today. My last question is one that I ask everybody, regardless of whatever my project is. MJ, where can people find you online? This is your chance to really promote yourself, be your own cheerleader. Share if you have a recent win, go ahead and share that recent win. So please step up on that soapbox.
so people can find me on LinkedIn. Actually, if you put MJ Torres on Google, my LinkedIn is one of the first things that pops up, which I'm very, very proud. I really worked on my LinkedIn, so it does give you results once you start working on it. In terms of like a recent win that I got, I am very excited because as I mentioned, I went to school for environment and I've done disability advocacy and I've done like climate justice and environmental advocacy separately, right? But I recently went to an environmental change maker summit in Squamish, British Columbia by the Starfish Canada. It's an organization that celebrates young environmental leaders. And I realized that I was not really exploring my full potential because I am like, privileged enough to have multiple identities. I'm a woman, I'm a person with a disability, and I'm Latinx. So they really encouraged me to explore this, and they actually nominated me to do a fellowship on climate and health and well-being. So I'm like very excited to be able to like join disability and climate action. So we'll see how that goes.
MJ, it's going to go great, and it's going to go great because you are doing it and you're passionate for the work. As you probably know, when climate disasters hit, third world countries, countries that we see on the nightly news, who suffers first, who suffers longest, who suffers most? Disabled people, usually.
Yes.
So thank you so much for doing that work, and thank you for joining me on True Disabled Story. MJ, thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Bye.